1896, Edison Company Annual Conference, Coney Island, New York. The electricity men sit around the table, talking about transportation. This engineer, teases one Edison employee, has built a quadricycle run by gasoline. Everyone then turns toward that young engineer, including the man at the head of the table, Thomas Edison. Is it a four-stage combustion? Asks Edison. The engineer, a young Henry Ford, breaks into a sweat. He's extremely nervous, and rightfully so. After all, Edison is an electricity man, and likely favors electric vehicles. But still, Ford gets up and presents to Edison, sketching out his engine while explaining the combustion process. How gas is an improvement over electricity because batteries are far too heavy and drain in cold weather. Then suddenly, mid-conversation, the old man rises and slams his hands down on the table. You've done it! He's just convinced Edison that the future will be gasoline-powered. And it is Henry Ford who will assemble that future, at the rate of one car every 93 minutes. Thanks so much to Henson Shaving for modernizing how I keep my face smooth. Here's an eye-opening thought. Henry Ford was born just after the Battle of Gettysburg and lived to see the beginning of the Cold War. Of course, in that span of time, the world changed in almost unbelievable ways, often as a result of his own innovations, and not always for the better, as we'll discuss in future episodes. Later in life, Ford would become almost painfully nostalgic for the era of his childhood, and spend millions building open-air museums of its buildings and artifacts, among which is an unassuming farmhouse, painstakingly furnished to the smallest detail, even with the drawers curated so they contained the precise objects he remembered in them. It was the house of his childhood. And despite this aforementioned nostalgia, also a house he had hated. Henry Ford's father had fled Ireland during the Great Famine and settled on a farm in Dearborn, Michigan. His mother was a second-generation immigrant from Belgium, raised by Irish neighbors when she was orphaned. And despite his parents' hardscrabble stories, they'd become successful and prosperous farmers. So, though not wealthy, young Henry Ford was never truly poor. There was always enough work to go around, which actually turned out to be a problem for young Henry because, man, he hated farm work. It was repetitive, physically taxing, and isolating. He despised horses, calling them dangerous and ill-tempered, and found drinking milk repulsive. He even considered chicken meat unfit for human consumption. Not to mention, young Ford was infamous for shirking his farm duties. About an hour into each day's work, Henry would usually go back to the house for a drink of water and then disappear. They'd find him later taking apart someone's watch. Now, most farmers of the time would have punished this behavior, but Ford's parents, his mother especially, indulged him. They set up a workbench where Ford could tinker and bought him tools. Still, his father's expectation that Ford one day would take over the farm strained their relationship, especially after Ford's beloved mother died when he was 13. That was one of two big changes that happened in Ford's early life. The other, when he first saw the engine. Fall 1875. Henry was helping his father bring in the harvest when they see it coming down the road atop four wheels. A portable traction engine, meant to be hooked up to threshing machines or sawmills to power them. And in a clever innovation, the machine is self-propelled. There are chains leading from the engine to the cart's rear wheels, so when the motor runs, the cart rolls slowly along the dirt road. Ford immediately stops the engineer and bombards him with questions. Who makes the machine? How fast can it go? How big is the boiler? Henry is 12, and he's just glimpsed a future where not only the tedium of farm labor can be eased, but where he can leave this farm behind on motor-driven wheels. That moment never left him. 4 years later, at 16, he convinced his father to let him move to Detroit to find an engineering job. In an act just pregnant with meaning, the man who would help revolutionize American transportation actually had no choice but to walk the 9 miles to the city. Detroit was another world when compared to his farm, one where there was plenty of work for a wannabe machinist, especially one like Ford, who was socially adept, confident, and willing to exaggerate his experience a bit. For the next decade, Ford worked a string of jobs, building his knowledge base and his reputation as a skilled machinist. He sought out roles where he could learn and experiment, those that had stores of older equipment he could try out and examine, or that included large amounts of downtime where he could mess around with the parts he occasionally pilfered from his workplace. And apart from a basic business course, this was Ford's education. His formal schooling had stopped at 8th grade and contained little that would prepare him for an industrial career. Though that doesn't mean it didn't shape him. Back in his school days, Ford's teachers instructed directly from readers, a form of early textbook that taught an uncritical ethos of American progress and capitalist economics that Ford deeply internalized while also containing some pretty blatant anti-Semitism. Wait, did you see that cloaked figure? Oh my gosh, it's the Foreshadow! The Foreshadow knows. Ford hopped jobs when he'd learned all he could, and his skills progressed quickly. By 19, when he circled back to his family farm to work a Westinghouse steam engine for a season, he was adept enough to get hired by Westinghouse to fix similar machines. And repair was his favorite type of job. It used his problem-solving abilities while giving him large blocks of time to tinker. And tinker he did, mostly with motors. He repaired an internal combustion engine, which helped him see the potential of gasoline, and even built a miniature model engine. His greatest accomplishment, though, was convincing a family friend, Clara Bryant, to marry him. She did so with the knowledge that she wouldn't really see him much. He worked 16-hour days, but they matched each other well. She listened when Ford talked about his experiments and had seemingly endless reserves of patience. Case in point, on Christmas Eve 1893, Clara had her hands full preparing a dinner for guests while also watching their 6-week-old son Edsel. But then in comes Henry, with his new gasoline engine, plopping it on the sink, and asking her to feed it gas as he turned the crank to make it run. Now, Rob, who is married, has some advice. Never do this, particularly when there are knives within easy reach. Clara, however, gamely served as assistant. Just like she put up with the constant house moves, the job changes, and the very strange things going on in the back shed. Thankfully, by 1891, Ford had a steady position at the Edison Illuminating Company of Detroit, repairing the engine that powered much of the city's lighting. That was just for money, though. His experiments were increasingly centered around internal combustion engines, which were sometimes known by the incredibly metal name explosion engines. In 1885, German engineer Gottlieb Daimler had demonstrated how one could power a vehicle, what we would call today a motorcycle. But the field was so new, no one knew what to call anything. In fact, the first ever car race in the United States, held in 1895, also included a contest to name these new vehicles. People called them many things, some still familiar, others strange, ranging from horseless carriage to gasoline wagon to motor carriage, motocycle, or auto carriage. Of course, we know that the French term automobile, meaning self-mobile, ultimately won out, but that took time. And if you'll notice, those names we listed showcase kind of a split. Half of the terms refer to wagons and carriages, where the other half refers to bicycles. Ford's work fell in the later camp. Starting out with the body of a cart or a carriage made it too heavy, he reasoned. Better to upscale a bicycle with its light spoked wheels and rubber tires, then put a carriage seat on it. That's what he did for years in his shed, crafting a vehicle he called the Ford Quadricycle, the car he would describe to Thomas Edison. But now, it's June 4th, 1896, and he is done testing. Unable to wait for the seat carriage he ordered to come, Ford decides to take his first drive on the quadricycle at 3 in the morning when the streets will be empty, watched by a bleary-eyed Clara and Edsel. He begins to push it out of the shed, but then suddenly stops. Oh no. There's a variable he never accounted for, despite 2 years of testing. It's too big to fit through the door. Not to worry. Ford hacks through the door frame with an axe, then once freed from the prison shed, he mounts his vehicle, starts the ethanol engine, and puts it into first gear. The cycle begins to move, the 4-horsepower engine speeding him along as he turns off the alley into the street at a sweet 10 miles an hour. A friend rides ahead warning traffic. He shifts into second gear, 20 miles an hour. Henry Ford is driving his first vehicle, but within the year, he'll sell it. Because he had a vision of a better model. A car that can not only enter the next great American motor race, but a car that can win it. Which would eventually set in motion a level of innovation and precision manufacturing of high-quality products that could be produced on a scale to keep them affordable. And that is a mindset that today's sponsor, Henson Shaving, a family-run aerospace machine shop that made one hell of a sharp pivot, has definitely taken to heart. I don't gotta tell you that buying razors today just sucks, right? Because all of these big companies that make the quadruple-bladed, moisture strip-coated, gimmick-infused nonsense cartridges really only produce those things to jack up prices for something that you have to buy over and over and over again. Well, thanks to Henson Shaving, I never have to put up with that crap again, because they've taken their know-how from crafting parts for things like the Mars rover and the ISS to now tackle something a little closer to home, aka giving me the closest shave humanly possible. Instead of making cheap handles and then charging you a bunch of cash for replacement cartridges, Henson instead crafted a precision-engineered safety razor, designed to hold the blade at exactly the optimal angle of 30 degrees from your skin. Then combine that with how securely the blade is held, with zero wobble mind you, and how minimally the blade's exposed, and it basically takes the guesswork out of getting a super close shave without a ton of waste or cost. Now, full disclosure, we know that something like this probably appeals most to those of you who consider overall cost of ownership, aka total lifetime cost, versus only looking at how much you pay up front. And the Henson AL13 is definitely more expensive than the cheap handles you could get at the drugstore or whatever, but the flip side of that equation is that their replacement blades are only 10 cents each, making your overall cost of use just absolutely cheaper in the long run. And you know, in that spirit, we can actually shave off a little extra for you. Whew, that sounded better in my head. Because if you head to our link below and choose one of their cool handles and pack of 100 blades to throw in your cart, right? Then use our code extra credits at checkout, you're gonna see the cost of those 100 blades drop to 0, meaning you're gonna get years worth of blades absolutely free. Love to see it. It's so cool. Once again, thank you so much to the fine folks at Henson Shaving for sponsoring this episode. And yeah, I'm just super pumped to be working with them because I do use their product, and I do really believe if you are looking for the best possible way to remove hair from your body, you absolutely cannot go wrong with their stuff. What if I told you that Ahmed Ziad Turk, Angelo Valenciana, Arclight Games, Casey Mustra, Dominic Valenciana, Joseph Blame, Kuya Koi, and Skylar Holmes were all legendary patrons? I'm not kidding.